The first shadow fell across Seoul at exactly 11:37 in the morning on a Tuesday that started like any other day. Park Min-soo was drinking his second cup of coffee at the communication center when the alerts began screaming. Every screen in the room turned red. Every phone rang at once. Every satellite dish pointed toward the sky started spinning wildly, as if searching for something that should not exist. "What is happening?" asked his partner Lee Dong-woo from across the room. Min-soo looked at his main screen. The numbers made no sense. Something huge was blocking the sun. Something so large that the computers could not calculate its size properly. "Sir, we have a problem," called out technician Nam Hae-won from her station near the window. Her voice was quiet, but her hands were shaking. "You need to see this." Min-soo walked to the window and looked up. His coffee cup fell from his hand and broke on the floor. The sky was full of ships. They were not like anything humans had ever built. These ships looked like they were made of black crystal that caught the light and threw it back in strange colors. Some ships were small like fighter jets. Others were so big they covered entire city blocks. The largest one hung directly over the city center like a dark mountain floating in the air. "How many are there?" Min-soo whispered. "We count over 300 ships just above Korea," Hae-won said while reading her instruments. "But the satellites show them everywhere. Above every major city on Earth. Above every military base. Above every capital." The communication systems came alive with voices from around the world. Reports flooded in from Tokyo, Beijing, Moscow, London, New York, and every other major city. The same message everywhere. The same impossible sight. Ships in the sky that should not exist. "Admiral Kim," Taeho's voice came through the main speakers from the military command center. "All units, this is command. We are dealing with what appears to be an extraterrestrial contact situation. Repeat. We have confirmed alien vessels in our atmosphere. All military units are to assume defensive positions, but do not fire unless fired upon." Min-soo grabbed his headset and started coordinating communications between different military units. His job was to make sure everyone could talk to each other when things went wrong. Today, everything was going wrong at once. The ships hung in the sky for exactly 1 hour without moving or making any sound. People came out of buildings to stare up at them. Traffic stopped as drivers got out of their cars to look. Children pointed at the sky from school playgrounds. Then the ships began to speak. The voice came from everywhere at once. It was not heard through speakers or radios. It came from the air itself, speaking in perfect Korean, perfect English, perfect Chinese, and every other language on Earth at the same time. "People of the planet you call Earth," the voice said. It sounded like rocks grinding together, but somehow formed words that everyone could understand. "We are the Veltar Empire. We have traveled across the galaxy to bring your world into our dominion. You now belong to us." Min-soo felt his heart stop beating for a moment. He looked around the room and saw the same fear on every face. "Your military forces are primitive and cannot harm us," the voice continued. "Your weapons are toys compared to our technology. We have conquered 200 worlds before yours. Some fought against us. Some surrendered immediately. Both choices led to the same result. We always win." The largest ship above Seoul began to glow with a blue light that hurt to look at directly. "You have one rotation of your planet to surrender completely. Lay down all weapons. Order all military forces to stand down. Prepare your leaders to transfer all authority to our commanders. If you comply, we will allow most of your population to live and serve our empire. If you resist, we will demonstrate why resistance is pointless." The voice stopped speaking. The ships returned to their silent waiting. Min-soo's hands moved automatically over his control panel, connecting calls and routing messages between military commanders who were all asking the same questions. "What do we do? How do we fight something like this? Is there any way to win? Admiral Kim Tae-ho's voice came through again, but this time he sounded older and tired. All units, prepare for defensive operations. If these beings think we will surrender without a fight, they do not understand humans. Very well. The next 24 hours passed like a nightmare that would not end. Earth's military forces tried everything they had. Fighter jets attacked the smaller alien ships and watched their missiles bounce off harmlessly. Naval ships fired their biggest guns at the vessels hovering over the oceans and saw the shells turn to dust before they could hit their targets. Army units with their most advanced weapons managed to scratch the paint on one small alien craft that had landed near Paris. The aliens did not fight back during the first day. They simply let humanity use up its ammunition and exhaust its forces. It was like watching children throw stones at a mountain. When the 24 hours ended, the aliens kept their promise to demonstrate their power. The attack began at dawn. In Korea, the crystal ships turned their attention to military targets first. Beams of green light reached down from the sky and touched army bases, naval ports, and air force installations. Where the light touched, everything simply vanished. Not destroyed or blown up. Just gone, as if it had never existed. Min-soo watched through satellite feeds as the main airbase near Busan disappeared in 3 seconds. One moment it was there with runways and hangars and planes. The next moment, there was only empty ground with grass growing where the base had been. The aliens moved methodically from one military target to another. They did not seem angry or excited about the fighting. They worked like farmers harvesting crops, efficient and emotionless. By noon, Earth's military forces had been reduced to small groups of soldiers hiding in mountains and forests. Every major weapon system was gone. Every command center had vanished. Every satellite had been pulled from orbit. Admiral Kim Tae-ho made his last broadcast from a hidden bunker somewhere in the mountains. To all remaining forces, he said, and his voice was barely a whisper, stand down. Save your lives for another day. This fight is over. Min-soo sat in his chair at the communications center and realized he had not thought about his daughter in hours. Lee So-young was a teacher at the small school in Hadong, a mountain village far from any military target. Maybe the aliens had not noticed such a small place. Maybe she was safe. He tried to call her, but the phone lines were not working properly. He tried the radio and heard only static mixed with voices speaking in the alien language. Finally, late in the evening, he managed to make contact with the emergency radio at So-young's school. Father, her voice came through the static, and she sounded scared but alive. The sky is burning here too. We can see the ships in the distance. The children are frightened. Are you hurt? Min-soo asked. Is anyone there hurt? No, we are safe. For now, but father, what is happening? What do these beings want? Min-soo looked out the window at the alien ships that now owned the sky above his city. He thought about everything that had happened in the last day. Earth's armies defeated in hours. Humanity's weapons useless against alien technology. His world conquered by beings from across the galaxy. But his daughter was alive. The children at her school were alive. That was something. I do not know what they want, he told her. But I promise you something, So-young. No matter what happens next, I will come back for you and the children. I will keep all of you safe. It was a promise that seemed impossible to keep. The aliens controlled everything. Now, but as Min-soo spoke the words, he felt something inside himself that had not been there before. A quiet strength that came from having something worth fighting for. I promise, he said again. No matter what happens, I will keep them safe. The alien ships settled into positions above Earth cities like dark stars that would never set. The Veltar Empire had claimed its 201st conquered world, but they had not counted on the power of a promise made by a father to his daughter in the darkness of defeat. 3 years had passed since the sky burned and the world changed forever. Park. Min-soo woke up in his bunk at the Bizen mining complex, as he had every morning for the past 1,000 days. The alarm bell rang at 5 in the morning. The lights came on automatically. The voice of Overseer Krollinth echoed through the speakers in broken Korean, telling all workers to report for their daily assignments. This was life under the Veltar Empire. Min-soo pulled on his gray work uniform and walked to the communal eating area. The food was always the same. A bowl of thick liquid that tasted like nothing but kept humans alive and strong enough to work. Around him, other prisoners ate in silence. Speaking during meals was not allowed, but Min-soo had learned to speak without words. He caught the eye of Choi Jae-min, a former soldier who worked in the same mining tunnel. Jae-min nodded slightly toward the door. Later, the nod said, "We will talk later." At the next table, Engineer Nam Hee-won was eating her food while drawing patterns in the spilled liquid with her finger. To the alien guards, it looked like she was playing with her food, but Min-soo could read the patterns. They were maps of the mining complex, numbers showing which tunnels led where. Information that might be useful someday. The aliens had been very efficient in organizing their new human workforce. They had moved people from their homes and families to places where they could be most useful. Teachers became information processors. Doctors became medical technicians for other human workers. Engineers became maintenance crews for alien machinery. And fathers who had worked in communications became miners, digging rare metals from deep underground tunnels. Min-soo had not seen his daughter, so young since the day the world ended. He did not know if she was alive or dead. The aliens did not allow humans to contact family members. They said it made workers less focused on their duties. But Min-soo had never stopped thinking about his promise. After breakfast, he walked to Tunnel 7, where he spent his days operating a machine that cut through rock and extracted minerals the aliens needed for their technology. The work was hard and dangerous. The tunnels were hot and filled with dust that made breathing difficult. Jae-min worked nearby, carrying the cut rock to processing stations. During their lunch break, they sat together in a corner where the alien cameras could not see them clearly. "I heard something interesting yesterday," Jae-min whispered while pretending to rest. One of the transport pilots was talking about a new facility, a place where they are sending human children. Min-soo felt his heart start beating faster. What kind of facility? An education center. But not for learning what we would teach. For learning to serve the Empire. They want to train children to work for them from a young age. Where is this place? In what used to be Seoul. The pilot said they are bringing children from all over the country. Thousands of them. Min-soo closed his eyes and tried to stay calm. So Young was a teacher. If the aliens were gathering children, they would need people who understood how to work with young humans. They might have taken her to this facility. "There is more," Jae-min continued. "The pilot said the children are being prepared for something bigger, transport to other worlds. The aliens want to spread human workers across their empire." That night, Min-soo lay in his bunk and stared at the ceiling. For 3 years, he had survived by telling himself that his daughter was safe somewhere, that the aliens would not harm someone who was not a threat to them, that he would find her when the time was right. But now he realized the truth. The aliens did not see humans as people. They saw them as resources to be used wherever they were needed most. And if So Young was with those children, she might be sent to another world where he could never find her. The promise he had made to keep her safe suddenly seemed more impossible than ever. Over the next few weeks, Min-soo began to pay attention to things he had ignored before. He listened to conversations between alien guards. He watched how the complex was organized. He learned the schedules of supply ships and transport vehicles. Most importantly, he started to understand how the aliens Thought. The Veltar Empire was very good at controlling large numbers of people through fear and separation. They had conquered 200 worlds by making sure that conquered populations could never organize or communicate effectively. They moved people away from their families. They mixed different species together so they could not understand each other. They kept everyone too busy and too scared to think about resistance. But Minsu began to see something the aliens had missed. Humans were different from other species the Empire had conquered. Other species seemed to accept defeat and adapt to their new lives as workers and servants. But humans carried something inside them that the aliens did not understand. They carried the memory of the people they loved, and that memory made them stronger instead of weaker. In Tunnel 7, Minsu started having quiet conversations with other workers. Not about escape or rebellion, about their families. About the people they had left behind. About the promises they had made and still wanted to keep. Jae-min talked about his younger brother who had been taken to a labor camp on the other side of the country. Hil-won talked about her parents who had been moved to a facility that processed alien technology. Other workers talked about children, parents, friends, and loved ones scattered across the planet. Minsu listened to all of them and began to understand something important. Every human in the complex was connected to other humans somewhere else. And every one of them was thinking about the same thing he was thinking about. How to keep the promises they had made to the people they loved. What if we could help each other? Minsu said to Jae-min one day while they worked. What if finding your brother could help me find my daughter? What if helping me could help you? Jae-min stopped working and looked at him carefully. What do you mean? I mean that maybe we are thinking about this wrong. Maybe the answer is not to escape or fight the aliens. Maybe the answer is to remember who we are fighting for. That night, Minsu started drawing his own patterns in the dust on his bunkroom floor, not maps of the mining complex. Maps of connections between people. Networks of families and friends scattered across the planet and beyond. The aliens had separated humans to make them weak. But what if separation could become connection instead? What if the very thing the aliens used to control humans could become the thing that freed them? Minsu thought about his daughter so young, probably teaching alien propaganda to human children in a facility hundreds of miles away. He thought about all the other parents who had made promises to their children. All the children who were waiting for their parents to come back. And he began to form a plan that had nothing to do with weapons or violence. And everything to do with the one thing the aliens had never learned to control, the power of a promise. Kept. Meanwhile, in the education facility that had once been Seoul, So Young was teaching a group of 30 children about the glory of the Veltar Empire. This was what the aliens required her to do. She taught them about alien technology, alien culture, and alien ways of thinking. But she also taught them other things. When the alien supervisors were not watching, she taught them the names of their parents. She taught them stories about their hometowns and families. She taught them songs that their grandparents had sung. She taught them that no matter how far they traveled or how long they were away, someone would always be looking for them. Remember, she would whisper to them during rest periods, someone made you a promise, and that promise will be kept. The children listened and remembered. And in remembering, they carried something the aliens could not see or control. They carried hope. 3 years after the conquest, the Veltar Empire controlled every government, every military, and every major resource on Earth. They had organized human society to serve their needs perfectly, but they had not counted on the power of promises made in the darkness. And they had not counted on the quiet strength of people who refused to forget the ones they loved. In mining tunnels and labor camps, in education facilities and processing centers, humans were beginning to remember something the aliens had tried to make them forget. They were beginning to remember who they were fighting for. The plan began with a simple message written on a piece of torn cloth. Park. Minsu had spent weeks thinking about how to connect humans across the planet without the aliens noticing. Radio communications were monitored. Computer systems were controlled. Mail did not exist anymore. But the aliens had overlooked one thing. Humans still moved from place to place. Transport. Ships carried workers between facilities. Supply trucks brought food and materials to different locations. Medical teams moved between camps to treat sick workers. And sometimes, workers were transferred from one assignment to another. Each time humans moved, they carried something the aliens could not detect. They carried memories, stories, and messages from other humans. Minsu wrote his first message on a small piece of fabric torn from his work shirt. The words were simple. My name is Park Minsu. I am looking for my daughter, Lee So-young, a teacher. She may be at an education facility. If you find her, tell her I am keeping my promise. If you need help finding someone, tell me who. I will help you if you help me. He gave the message to a medical technician named Yoon Da-hai, who was being transferred to a facility near Seoul. Da-hai was looking for her husband, who had been taken to a labor camp somewhere in the mountains. Find my daughter, Minsu told her quietly, and I will help you find your husband. Da-hai nodded and hid the message in her medical supplies. 2 weeks later, Da-hai returned to Bizen with a transport ship carrying new mining equipment. She found Minsu during the lunch break and whispered 4 words that changed everything. I found her. She's alive. Minsu felt his heart stop and start again. Where is she? Seoul Education Facility 7. She is teaching children. She looks healthy but sad. I told her you are keeping your promise. Da-hai handed Minsu a small piece of paper. On it, So-young had written her own message. Father, I am well. The children are brave. I teach them to remember. We are waiting. Your daughter. Minsu read the message 3 times before he understood that his plan could actually work. Da-hai had found his daughter. Now he had to help Da-hai find her husband. But more importantly, he had to help others do the same thing. Over. The next month, Minsu began spreading his message to other workers. Not everyone at once. Not in groups that might attract attention. One person at a time, carefully chosen. To Jaemin, who was still looking for his brother. To Haewon, who wanted to find her parents. To others who had families scattered across the planet. The message was always the same. Help someone else find their family, and others will help you find yours. The network grew slowly. Each person who joined was asked to help one other person and to recruit one new person. Workers being transferred between facilities carried messages and information. Medical teams brought news from other locations. Even alien supply ships became carriers of human hope without the aliens knowing it. Choi Jae-min found his brother at a construction facility on Jeju Island. The brother was working on buildings that would house alien administrators. Through him, the network reached workers on the island who had connections to fishing crews that were still operating under alien supervision. Nam Hae-won discovered that her parents were at a technology center near Daegu. They were working on maintaining alien communication equipment. Through them, the network gained access to information about alien schedules and transport routes. Each new connection made the network stronger. Each person who found their family became someone who could help others do the same thing. But the network was not just growing on Earth. Da-hai brought back information that changed everything Minsu thought he knew about the alien empire. The education facility where So-young worked was not just training children to serve on Earth. It was preparing them to be sent to other worlds where human workers were needed. Some children had already been transported to mining planets and other star systems. Others were being prepared for agricultural worlds where they would grow food for alien populations. The Empire was spreading humans across the galaxy like seeds, but wherever humans went, they carried the network with them on the mining planet. Kefmur, human workers were making contact with each other using the same methods Minsu had developed. Messages passed between work crews. Information traveled through supply chains. Workers helped each other find family members who had been transported to different facilities on the same world. On the agricultural planet Vexthani, human children who had been trained at facilities like So-Youngs were teaching other human workers the songs and stories they had learned. They were keeping alive the memory of Earth and the families they had left behind. The network was becoming something larger than Minsu had ever imagined. It was not just connecting humans on one world. It was connecting humans across the entire Veltar Empire. And it was growing stronger every day. 6 months after Minsu sent his first message, the network included thousands of humans on dozens of worlds. Workers in mining facilities were connected to farmers on agricultural planets. Children in education centers were sending messages to parents in labor camps. Families separated by light years were finding ways to communicate and support each other. The aliens noticed none of this. To them, human workers seemed to be adapting well to their roles in the Empire. Productivity was high. Resistance was minimal. There were no organized rebellions or escape attempts. The humans appeared to be accepting their fate as conquered people. But Commander Thakver, who supervised the Soul Education Facility, began to notice something strange about the human children under his control. They were too happy. Children who had been separated from their families should have been sad and broken. They should have been eager to please their alien masters in hopes of being treated well. Instead, these children seemed confident and strong. They obeyed orders, but they did not seem afraid. Thakver asked the human teacher, So-Young, about this behavior. The children adapt quickly, So-Young told him. They are learning to serve the Empire as you have taught us. But Thakver was not satisfied. He had conquered many worlds and seen many species broken by separation from their families. Humans should not be different. He decided to test the children's loyalty. Tomorrow, he announced to So-Young, we will select 50 children for transport to the mining world Drakethus. They will serve the Empire there for the rest of their lives. They will never return to this world or see their families again. So-Young felt her heart break, but she kept her face calm. Yes, Commander, I will prepare them. That night, So-Young wrote a message on a piece of cloth torn from her teaching robe. She gave it to a medical technician who was scheduled to visit other facilities the next day. The message was simple. 50 children will be taken tomorrow. Tell their families. Tell everyone. It is time. The message traveled through the network, faster than light-speed communication. From Seoul to Bizen to Jeju Island to facilities across the planet. From Earth to other worlds through supply ships and transport vessels. From parents to children to friends to strangers who had promised to help. By morning, every human in the network knew what was happening. More importantly, they knew what they had to do. Minsu received the message while working in Tunnel 7. He read it twice and then looked at Ji-Min and Hae-Won. It is time, he said quietly. They nodded. They had been preparing for this moment for months. Not preparing weapons or escape plans. Preparing something more powerful. They had been preparing to keep their promises. The network had grown from one father's promise to his daughter into something the Veltar Empire had never encountered before. It was a web of connections that spanned star systems. A community of people who had never met, but who trusted each other completely. A family that included thousands of humans across dozens of worlds. And families, Minsu had learned, will do anything to protect their children. The aliens had built their empire on the idea that conquered people could be controlled through fear and separation. They had never encountered a species that became stronger when separated. They had never fought an enemy that grew more powerful the more pressure was applied. They had never faced the power of promises that would not be broken tomorrow. Minsu thought as he prepared for sleep, the network would be tested. Tomorrow, they would discover if thousands of small promises could be stronger then the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Tomorrow, they would find out if love could defeat technology. In her room at the education facility, So Young was teaching the children one last lesson. She was teaching them a song about going home. She was teaching them that no matter how far they traveled, someone would always be looking for them. Remember, she whispered to them as they prepared for sleep, someone made you a promise, and that promise will be kept. The children listened and remembered. And across the galaxy, their families prepared to prove that some promises are stronger than empires. The day began like any other day in the Veltar Empire. Alarm bells rang at 5 in the morning. Work assignments were distributed. Human workers reported to their stations across dozens of worlds. But something was different. Park Min-soo woke up in his bunk at the Bizon mining complex and knew that this was the day he would keep his promise to his daughter. After 4 years of separation, after 4 years of building the network, after 4 years of waiting for the right moment, the time had finally come. He dressed in his gray work uniform and walked to the communal eating area. Around him, other workers were doing the same thing they had done every morning for years. But today, they were not just workers. Today, they were parents, children, brothers, sisters, and friends who had made promises to each other. Choi Jae-min sat at the table next to Min-soo. Nam Hae-won sat across from them. Around the room, dozens of other workers ate their breakfast in the usual silence. But their eyes were bright with something the aliens had never seen before. At exactly 8 o'clock, when the work shift was supposed to begin, Min-soo stood up from his table and walked toward the exit. He did not run. He did not shout. He simply walked like a man who had somewhere important to go. Jae-min stood up and followed him. Then Hae-won. Then another worker, and another, and another. The alien guards at the entrance to the mining tunnels watched in confusion as the entire workforce of the complex walked past them without stopping. The guards shouted orders in their harsh language, but the humans did not respond. They were not running away. They were not attacking. They were simply leaving. "Where are you going?" demanded Overseer Krallant as he stepped in front of Min-soo. Min-soo looked at the alien calmly. "I am going to keep a promise to my daughter. You will return to your workstation immediately," Krallant ordered. "No," Min-soo said simply. "I will not." The Overseer raised his weapon, but Min-soo did not stop walking. Behind him, hundreds of other workers continued moving toward the exit. They were not being violent or threatening. They were just walking. With the quiet determination of people who had decided that some things were more important than their own safety, Krallant found himself facing a situation he had never encountered before. His training told him to use force against rebellious workers. But these humans were not rebelling in any way he understood. They were not trying to escape or cause damage. They were simply refusing to work, and they were not alone. Similar scenes were happening at facilities across the planet. In Seoul, human workers at the education center were walking away from their stations. In Daegu, technicians were leaving their posts at the alien communication centers. On Jeju Island, construction crews were setting down their tools and walking toward the main transport hub. Every human who had joined the network was doing the same thing at the same time. They were leaving their assigned positions and walking toward the places where their families were being held. Commander Thakever stood in the main hall of Seoul Education Facility 7 and watched his perfectly organized system fall apart. Human workers who maintained the facility had simply stopped working. The teachers who educated the children had gathered their students and were walking toward the main exit. "Stop," he commanded, but his voice seemed small in the large space. The humans did not stop. They walked past him as if he were not there. Parents were calling out the names of their children. Children were singing the songs their teacher, So Young, had taught them. Families were finding each other after years of separation. Thakever activated his communication device and called for military support. But when he tried to contact other facilities, he discovered that the human workers who operated the communication systems had also stopped working. His messages were not getting through. Across the planet, the same thing was happening. Humans were walking away from power plants, leaving alien technology to shut down automatically. They were abandoning supply centers, causing distribution networks to fail. They were leaving their posts at transportation hubs, grounding ships and vehicles. The entire infrastructure of the occupation was collapsing, not because of sabotage or violence, but because the people who operated it had simply decided to stop. Minsu walked for 3 hours before he reached the transport hub where he knew ships traveled to Seoul. Behind him, the entire workforce of the mining complex followed. They were not marching like soldiers. They were walking like people going to a family reunion. When they reached the transport facility, they found that other groups of humans were arriving from different directions. Workers from manufacturing plants, processing centers, and agricultural facilities were all converging on the same location. They were all following the same plan that had been passed through the network for months to go to the transport hubs. Find the ships that carry people between facilities. Get on those ships and go to where your families are being held. The alien guards at the transport facility tried to stop them, but there were too many humans and too few guards. More importantly, the humans were not fighting. They were simply walking past the guards and getting on the ships. "You cannot board these vessels without authorization," shouted Transport Supervisor Vexcall. "We are going to find our families," Minsu told him. "You can shoot us if you want, but we are not going to stop." Vexcall raised his weapon, but hesitated. These humans were not acting like enemies. They were acting like people who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Shooting them would only create martyrs. And there were so many of them. Behind Minsu, thousands of humans were boarding transport ships. They were taking control of the vessels not through violence, but through simple determination. Alien pilots who tried to resist found themselves surrounded by humans who were not threatening them, just refusing to leave. The ships began to take off with their human passengers. But instead of flying to assigned destinations, they were flying to Seoul, to the education facilities where children were being held. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. On the mining planet Kethmer, human workers were walking away from their assigned positions and gathering at the main administrative center. They were calling out the names of family members who had been taken to other worlds. They were demanding to know where their children had been sent. On the agricultural world Vexthani, human farmers were leaving their assigned plots and walking toward the facilities where newly arrived children were being processed. They were not carrying weapons. They were carrying pictures and small gifts they had made for the children they had never met, but who reminded them of their own families. The network that had begun with one father's promise to his daughter had become something the Veltar Empire had never seen before. It was a coordinated action involving millions of humans across dozens of worlds, all happening at the same time, all focused on the same goal: reuniting families. When Minsu's transport ship landed at Seoul, he found that the education facility was already surrounded by humans. Parents were calling out the names of their children. Children were looking out the windows and waving at people they had never seen, but somehow recognized. The alien guards at the facility had barricaded themselves inside and were calling for military support. But their communications were not working, because the humans who operated the communication systems had also stopped working. Minsu walked to the main entrance of the facility and called out in a voice that carried across the entire complex. "Lee So-young, this is your father. I have come to keep my promise." A window on the 3rd floor opened, and So-young looked out. She saw her father standing among thousands of other humans who had come to find their families. She saw parents holding pictures of their children. She saw children pointing at people they thought might be their mothers and fathers. "I am here, father," she called back. "We are all here." Behind her, 50 children who had been scheduled for transport to another world were looking out the windows at the crowd below. They were pointing at people they thought might be their families. They were singing the songs So Young had taught them about going home. Commander Thakver appeared at another window with his weapon raised. "Disperse immediately, or we will fire," he shouted. The humans below looked up at him calmly. They did not run or hide. They simply stood there, thousands of them, waiting for their families to come out. "We are not leaving without our children." Mensu called up to him. "You can kill us, but more will come. We will keep coming until our families are together again." Thakver realized that he was facing something he had never encountered in his military career. An enemy that grew stronger when threatened. An enemy that could not be defeated because it was not trying to win a battle. It was trying to keep a promise. And across the galaxy, on every world where humans lived and worked, the same scene was playing out. Families were finding each other. Parents were calling out for their children. Children were searching for their parents. The Veltar Empire was discovering that they had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed that humans were like every other species they had conquered. They had assumed that separation would make humans weak and controllable. Instead, separation had made humans stronger. It had given them something to fight for. And now that they were fighting, they were not using weapons or violence. They were using the most powerful force in the universe of love. The first crack in the Veltar Empire appeared at exactly noon on a day that started with a father calling his daughter's name, Park. Minsu stood in the courtyard of Seoul Education Facility 7 and watched his daughter So Young walk out of the building with 50 children following behind her. After 4 years of separation, after 4 years of building hope through messages passed between strangers, after 4 years of believing in a promise that seemed impossible to keep, they were together again. But as So Young ran toward her father, and the children ran toward the crowd of humans looking for their families, something larger was beginning to happen. Something that would change the galaxy forever. The reunion in Seoul was being repeated on worlds across the Veltar Empire. On the mining planet Kethmer, human workers had occupied the administrative center and were demanding access to the transportation. Records that would tell them where their families had been sent. The alien administrators had barricaded themselves in their offices, but they were discovering that their authority meant nothing when the people they controlled refused to recognize it. On the agricultural world Vexthani, human farmers had gathered at the processing center where newly arrived children were being prepared for work assignments. They were not violent or threatening. They simply stood there, thousands of them, and refused to leave until the children were released to them. On the industrial planet Mordak, human technicians had walked away from the factories that produced weapons and equipment for the Empire's military. Without human workers to operate the complex machinery, production had stopped completely. But the most devastating blow to the Empire was not happening on any single world. It was happening in the space between worlds, in the vast network of ships and stations that kept the Empire connected and functioning. Human workers operated much of the Empire's transportation system. They maintained the ships, managed the cargo, and processed the communications that allowed the Veltar to control their vast territory. And now, all of those humans were simply stopping work. Supply ships hung motionless in space as their human crews refused to follow orders. Communication stations went silent as human operators walked away from their posts. Trade routes that had functioned for centuries suddenly became useless as the humans who managed them decided they had more important things to do. High Coordinator Vexmuth stood in the command center of the Empire's capital world and watched his civilization collapse in real time. Status reports flooded in from across the galaxy, all telling the same impossible story. The humans had stopped working, not rebelled, not attacked, not tried to escape. They had simply stopped participating in the system that controlled them. How is this possible? Vexmuth demanded of his intelligence chief, Krull Vex. Our reports indicated that human resistance was minimal. Their morale was low. They had accepted their position in the Empire. The reports were accurate, Coordinator, Krull Vex replied, his voice uncertain. Human productivity was high. They showed no signs of organized resistance. There were no weapon stockpiles, no secret meetings, no communication networks that we could detect. Then how are they coordinating this action across multiple star systems simultaneously? Vex consulted his data screens, but the information made no sense. We do not know. Our surveillance systems show no evidence of how they are communicating with each other. It is as if they are acting on some kind of shared instinct. What the aliens did not understand was that humans had been communicating through a network they could never detect. Not through technology or secret codes, but through something much simpler and more powerful. They had been communicating through trust. Every human who had joined Minsu's network had made the same basic promise. Help someone else find their family, and others will help you find yours. Over 4 years, this simple promise had spread to millions of humans across dozens of worlds. It had created connections between people who had never met, but who trusted each other completely. And when the time came to act, they did not need complex coordination or detailed plans. They all knew what to do because they all wanted the same thing: to be with the people they loved. Commander Thakver stood in the empty halls of Seoul Education Facility 7 and tried to understand what had happened to his perfectly organized system. Hours ago, he had controlled hundreds of human workers and thousands of human children. Now the facility was empty except for alien staff who had no idea how to operate the systems that humans had been maintaining. Outside, he could see humans reuniting with their families. Children were running to parents they had not seen in years. Parents were holding children they thought they might never see again. People were crying and laughing and singing songs in languages the aliens did not understand. Thakver activated his communication device to call for military support, but discovered that the communication system was not working. The humans who had maintained it were outside celebrating with their families, instead of inside keeping the technology functioning. He tried to access the transport system to call for evacuation ships, but the transport network was also offline. Human operators across the planet had abandoned their posts at the same time. For the first time in his long military career, Thakver realized that he was completely powerless. His weapons meant nothing when there was no one to fight. His authority meant nothing when no one was listening to his orders. His technology meant nothing when the people who operated it had simply walked away. Similar realizations were occurring to Veltar commanders across the galaxy. On Kefmer, Military Governor Drakethus discovered that his mining operations had ceased completely. The humans who worked the extraction equipment had left their posts to search for their families. Without human labor, the sophisticated alien machinery sat idle and useless. On Vexthani, Agricultural Supervisor Morkith found that food production had stopped across the entire planet. Human farmers had abandoned their assigned plots to help reunite children with their families. The automated systems could not function without human maintenance and oversight. On Mordak, Industrial Coordinator Velthas watched weapons production grind to a halt as human technicians simply walked out of the factories. The most advanced manufacturing systems in the galaxy became worthless without the human workers who understood how to operate them. But the worst news came from the Empire's military command fleet. Admiral Zarkith reviewed reports from across the Empire's naval forces and discovered a catastrophic truth. Human crews operated nearly 30% of the Empire's ships. They maintained the engines, managed the supplies, and handled the complex logistics that kept the fleet operational. And now, on ships across the galaxy, human crew members were refusing to work. Some ships were stranded in deep space as their Human engineers walked away from the engine rooms. Other ships found themselves unable to navigate as human technicians abandoned the sensor arrays and communication systems. Entire battle fleets were rendered helpless as the humans who kept them functioning decided they had more important things to do than serve an empire that had separated them from their families. The Veltar Empire had conquered 200 worlds by using superior technology and overwhelming force. But their technology required maintenance, and their force required logistics, and both of those things required workers who were willing to do the work. When the workers stopped working, the Empire stopped functioning. High Coordinator Vexmuth convened an emergency session of the Imperial Council to address the crisis. The greatest military minds in the galaxy gathered to discuss how to defeat an enemy unlike any they had ever faced. "We could use force to compel the humans to return to work," suggested General Kralmuth. "With what forces?" replied Admiral Zarketh. "Half of our ships are non-operational because their human crews have abandoned their posts. The other half are stranded without supply lines because human workers have left the logistics centers." "We could negotiate with them," suggested Intelligence Chief Krolvex. "Negotiate what?" Vexmuth replied. "They are not making demands. They are not asking for better conditions or higher status. They simply want to be with their families. How do we negotiate with that?" The council fell silent as they realized the scope of their problem. Every other species the Empire had conquered could be controlled through fear, rewards, or punishment. But humans seemed to operate according to different principles entirely. They valued something the Veltar had never understood and could not control. They valued each other more than they valued their own safety. Reports continued to arrive from across the Empire, each one describing the same phenomenon. Human workers abandoning their posts not to escape or cause damage, but to find their families. Humans refusing orders not out of hatred for their masters, but out of love for their children. On some worlds, other conquered species were beginning to watch the humans with growing interest. The Kethmori, a reptilian species that had been conquered 50 years earlier, saw humans walking away from their assigned duties and remembered their own families that had been separated by the Empire. Some Kethmori workers began leaving their posts to search for relatives they had not seen in decades. The Drayalani, an aquatic species enslaved 30 years ago, observed humans reuniting with their children and began to remember the spawning grounds where their own young had been taken. Small groups of Drayalani started abandoning their underwater mining operations to return to their ancestral breeding areas. The empire that had controlled the galaxy for centuries was discovering that its foundation was built on sand. When one species refused to be controlled, other species began to remember that they also had choices. Back on Earth, Minsu held his daughter So Young in his arms and watched as families reunited all around them. Children who had been separated from their parents for years were learning their family names again. Parents who had thought their children were lost forever were hearing their voices and seeing their faces. But even as he celebrated his own reunion, Minsu understood that this was about more than just human families. This was about proving that some things were stronger than empires. Commander Fakevor approached them slowly, his weapon lowered. He looked tired and confused, like someone who had just watched his entire worldview collapse. "How did you do this?" he asked Minsu. "How did you coordinate this action across the entire galaxy without our detection systems noticing?" Minsu looked at the alien commander and felt something unexpected. Not hatred or anger, but pity. "We did not coordinate anything," Minsu said gently. "We just kept our promises to each other. That is impossible. Such a complex operation requires communication networks, command structures, supply lines." "No," Minsu said. "It requires something much simpler. It requires people who care about each other." Fakevor stared at him as if he were speaking in an unknown language. "You have destroyed the most powerful empire in the galaxy for the sake of emotional attachments. We have not destroyed anything, So Young said, stepping forward. We have just remembered who we are. Around them, other humans were having similar conversations with confused alien guards and administrators. They were not gloating about their victory or threatening their former captors. They were simply explaining something that the aliens found incomprehensible. That love was stronger than fear, that families were more important than empires, that promises once made should be kept no matter the cost. High Coordinator Vexmuth received the final report from his intelligence services 3 days after the humans had stopped working. The report was brief and devastating. The Veltar Empire is no longer functional, Kralvex reported. Human workers have abandoned their posts on every world we control. Production has stopped. Transportation networks have failed. Communication systems are offline. Military operations have ceased. What about our own people? Vexmuth asked. Can we not operate our technology without human assistance? We have relied on conquered species for manual labor and technical support for over 2 centuries, Kralvex admitted. Our own people have forgotten how to perform many of these functions. We can operate our technology, but we cannot maintain it, repair it, or produce new versions of it without the workers we have lost. Vexmuth stood in silence for a long moment, contemplating the collapse of everything his people had built. There is more, Kovacs continued reluctantly. Other species are beginning to follow the human example. The Kethmori have abandoned their mining operations on 17 worlds. The Drayalani have left their underwater facilities on 12 planets. The Yorthak have stopped working in our manufacturing centers. Are they rebelling? No, Coordinator. Like the humans, they are simply leaving to find their families. Vexmuth realized that his empire was facing something it had never encountered before. Not a military defeat, but a complete rejection of the principles on which the empire was built. The conquered species were not fighting the Veltar. They were simply refusing to participate in their own oppression. And without willing participants, the empire could not function. 1 week after Minsu had walked away from his assigned workstation in Tunnel 7, he stood on a hill overlooking Seoul and watched transport ships carrying families back to their home regions. The alien occupation infrastructure was still in place, but it was empty and powerless. The Veltar still had their advanced technology, but they had no one to operate it for them. So Young stood beside her father and watched children board ships that would take them back to villages and towns they had not seen in years. What happens now? She asked. Now we go home, Minsu said. And we remember that some promises are worth keeping no matter how impossible they seem. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out as families reunited and communities rebuilt themselves. The Veltar Empire still existed in name, but it controlled nothing except empty buildings and abandoned machinery. The empire had fallen not to superior weapons or military strategy, but to something much simpler and more powerful. It had fallen to the quiet determination of people who refused to forget the ones they loved. And in falling, it had taught the galaxy a lesson that would be remembered for generations to come. That empires built on fear and separation cannot survive when people choose love and connection instead. That the strongest force in the universe is not technology or military power, but the willingness to keep a promise made to someone you care about. That sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting your enemies, but from simply remembering who you are fighting for. Minsu had kept his promise to his daughter, and in keeping that promise, he had helped bring down the most powerful empire the galaxy had ever known. Not through weapons or violence, but through the simple act of refusing to abandon the people he loved. The Veltar Empire was over, but the families it had tried to destroy were just beginning to heal. And across the galaxy, beings of every species were learning that some things are indeed stronger than empires. Some things are worth any sacrifice. Some promises should never be broken.